Star Wars is big business now, but it was also still riding a wave of success when Atari released the Star Wars arcade game in 1983, a vector-based game representing the events of the first movie. This is amongst the most well-loved and successful arcade games of all time, and it was no surprise that it ended up being converted to multiple systems. As we will see, it even ended up being converted more than once, and of course spawned some sequels. Parker Brothers first converted Star Wars to the Commodore in 1984. It was released on cartridge, and it's notable that this uses flat sprites to draw the graphics rather than the vector lines of the other conversions. While superficially this looks like the arcade version, it plays more like a simple game from the Atari 2600 era. The sprites don't scale up like the vector versions, and so it looks more like a swarm of flies and insects when shooting the TIE fighters and fireballs. These days, this isn't anything more than a curiosity or collector's item. Domark then had another crack at making a playable version on the C64. There does seem to be two versions of the Domark conversion, with an alternate version involving either Tenjin or Broderbund. This first one isn't the version I had, and it doesn't have a lot of footage online either. Both Domark versions look much the same. The main difference in appearance is in the enemy fireball graphics. This one looks more like a group of stars rather than a ring of crosses. Appearance aside, this version is also much more difficult than the other Domark version. Shooting the fireballs is much harder, and so shields are lost much quicker. There's also a bigger variability in the frame rate with this version, with some sections as slow as treacle, while the trench run can whiz by. So the version I recommend you try out is this final version. If you track down the budget release from the Hit Squad on tape, this is the one you'll get. While I think this is the best of the three versions, there are significant amounts of slowdown to contend with here, making it feel like you're playing this in slow motion anytime there are more than a few elements on the screen. The difficulty feels more like the arcade version, where the easy setting is laughably easy, medium's doable, and hard takes a bit of practice to manage all the way through. Like the arcade version, the easy setting omits the surface of the Death Star section and the catwalks from the trench run. While it's some good nostalgic fun, the low frame rates make this a sometimes tedious playthrough, as with most 3D or vector-based games on the C64. This hardware is built with sprites in mind, rather than the fast-moving wireframe graphics, and it shows. Less well remembered is the Empire Strikes Back arcade game. Sold as an upgrade kit for the original arcade game rather than a totally new cabinet, this was much less commonly found in arcades. I had the good fortune to play this at a holiday park as a kid, and slunk 20 pences into it every night for 2 weeks straight. The C64 version is more of the same as the Star Wars conversion. Wireframe vector graphics represent your speeder, probe droids, and Imperial walkers. It follows the plot of the film tightly, so counterintuitively it is better to let some enemies escape your lasers so that you can progress to the next stage, letting the probe droids reveal your position and the walkers destroy the base shields. Where the black background suited the space backdrop of the first game, this obviously doesn't recreate the snowy Hoth setting terribly well. Again, there's a bit of slowdown here, but not as noticeable as the previous game, probably as there are fewer enemies on the screen at once. You can take down the ATATs with a tow cable by hitting the spacebar, which is good fun. But I feel it is superseded by the next generation of Star Wars games that have a Hoth level in them, whereas blowing up the Death Star in the first game still feels satisfying now. This game is hamstrung by sticking to the plot of the film too closely, as the final stage is fairly flat feeling. There's no thrill of blowing up the Death Star here, just escaping from some asteroids. Maybe a little more polished than the first game, but probably not more fun. Return of the Jedi deviates from the previous entries in the series in that it is an isometric scrolling game, with sprites rather than vector graphics. All three arcade machines use the same analog flight yoke to control your ship or vehicle, and while you would think moving a sprite around would translate better than controlling a crosshair on the C64, this isn't really the case here. Some dodgy hit detection and tedious memorisation of upcoming obstacles spoil the gameplay here. The flight yoke of the arcade allowed for some deft movements, avoiding tree stumps and Death Star girders that is impossible here. The move away from the vector graphics can't be blamed on the C64 conversion team, but it certainly detracts from the atmosphere and immersion, and the graphics feel a little flat and uninspired even for the time. There are some nice touches here though. The action cuts away from Endor to the space battle almost seamlessly, and there's at least a variety of backdrops to the levels, even changing the direction of the isometric scrolling to change things up. All said, this is only worth playing today if you're a hardcore Star Wars fan, or enjoy memorising avoiding collisions through games. And with that, you would think the saga is over. However, to quote Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, there is another. As hard to believe as it might be today, there was a time when Star Wars wasn't seen as a major cultural force. With its popularity on the wane in the mid-80s, George Lucas gave his blessing to 2 Ewok movies and 2 Saturday morning cartoons, one based again on Ewoks and the other that gave rise to this game, Droids, following the story of R2-D2 and C64. Released as a budget title by Mastertronic, this is a curious puzzle adventure game without many puzzles or much adventure. You use icons to control the droid duo, which makes reacting to the enemy droids in time very difficult. The puzzles are little more than memorising a flashing colour pattern when hacking into the door controls, something that proves more difficult than it sounds with the limitations of the colour palette on the C64. There's little here to give that Star Wars feel to the game other than the droids themselves. This one is really for the hardcore fan to check off a list to say you've played it, or to bamboozle people with the most obscure Star Wars game you can think of. So that completes our roundup of official Star Wars games on the C64. If you only have time to try one, make it the last version of the Star Wars arcade game, and try and picture yourself in that glorious sit-down cockpit cabinet. Thanks for watching, and give a thumbs up if you liked this video. Drop me a comment below on your memories of playing these conversions, and until next time, may the Force be with you.